Top officials of 34 nations in the Western Hemisphere gathered to negotiate a free trade area of the Americas Agreement, promising to eliminate trade and investment obstacles between their countries. FTAA supporters say the purpose of their efforts is to foster economic progress, enhance domestic prosperity, and raise living standards throughout the hemisphere.
The grandiose promises of FTAA proponents are carefully worded to put casual observers at ease. After all, who doesn't want to raise their standard of living? The real goals driving the plan, however, are not so publicly promoted. And with the aggressive push to complete the agreement by January of 2005, Americans will have little time to learn how the FTAA will actually affect them. A major impact, however, will be its effect on one of the most intrusive challenges confronting America today. From the beginning of our nation, immigrants of every race, color, and creed have come to America in hope of a better life. In order for America to assimilate people of other cultures and political outlooks, early leaders felt that the wisest course was to limit the flow of immigrants to a small percentage of the population. By contrast, in recent decades, federal policies have encouraged virtually unlimited immigration.
I now declare that each of you is a citizen of the United States.
The U.S. generously welcomes more legal immigrants than the rest of the world combined. At the same time, the U.S. has become the only major country lacking effective control of its borders. As a consequence, America is at risk of being transformed through invasion. In 1970, the Immigration and Naturalization Service estimated that 200,000 illegal immigrants were living in America. By 2004, the estimate had risen to over 15 million. Immigrants, both legal and illegal, and their offspring, now comprise 3/4 of all U.S. population growth. In states most affected, the cost of government services for immigrant families has placed enormous burdens on taxpayers. Many communities live with the reality that the American dream is being destroyed by out-of-control immigration.
And what we are saying is we ought not allow...
Proposals to solve the problem are tossed about on Capitol Hill and on primetime TV. But all of this discussion seems to have little impact on the growing nightmare. And with good reason. Erecting stronger fences, beefing up our border patrol, or even imposing tougher penalties for trespassers will not solve the problem by themselves. William F. Jasper is a senior editor for the New American Magazine.
All of those enforcement methodologies are really of no value if you have people at the policy levels, the political levels in our government who are thwarting that regularly. So the problem isn't a lack of the technology or a lack of the manpower. It is the sabotage from within at the highest levels of our government.
Immediately after assuming office, President Bush began working with Mexico's President Vicente Fox on a plan to grant amnesty to illegal aliens. Their objective was to make it easier for job seekers to migrate north and gain the benefits of American citizenship. But the 9/11 attacks forced the plans to take a back seat to concerns for national security. 2 years later, amnesty plans were again in the front seat, and proposals were coming from both sides of the aisle. A New York Times article reports,
For the first time since the attacks of 9/11, several Republicans in Congress are pushing broad legislation that would regulate the flow of foreign workers into the country and potentially legalize millions of illegal employees.
Republican Senator John McCain and Republican Representatives Jim Colby and Jeff Flake introduced their Immigration Improvement Act, and quickly receive encouragement from President Bush. Representative Tom Tancredo of Colorado criticizes the act.
It's really amnesty on the installment plan. They are even more ambitious in their amnesty proposal than some of the Democrats I've seen.
Early contenders for the Democratic presidential nomination gather in New Mexico for a debate targeted at Hispanic voters. The Washington Times reports that all 8 contenders embraced amnesty for illegal aliens. Then, in early 2004, President Bush went public with his own amnesty proposal.
The citizenship line, however, is too long, and our current limits on legal immigration are too low. My administration will work with the Congress to increase the annual number of green cards that can lead to citizenship.
We have no excuse for falling for another program of amnesty. We know the consequences. We've seen it many times. We have had many different amnesties already implemented in this country. We were told this is going to be a one-time thing. We have several million illegal aliens in this country who we should just give amnesty, let them become legalized, then they'll become productive citizens, they'll come out of the shadows, and everything will be wonderful. Well, we've done this time after time, and what we find out is that as soon as those people who are here criminally are legalized, we see a chain migration. They bring in more family members, or it encourages people who are completely unrelated to them to come into the country. One amnesty begets another.
Despite the failure of previous amnesties to resolve the immigration crisis, such proposals continue to draw political support.
In many cases, the individual politicians, very clearly they have their own opportunistic futures in mind. Many politicians just view this as a way to buy votes.
But the more serious problem, political figures who have signed on to a bigger agenda. Unfortunately, many of these leaders regard the immigration problem not as a crisis to be solved, but as an opportunity to accomplish something else. The invasion across America's border has also been seized as an opportunity by some, whose goals have little to do with bettering the lives of those flocking to the U.S.
It's time for us to take back what is ours.
Come back and take back the entire southwestern part of the United States.
Separate republic in the southwest United States.
These would-be leaders seek to convince the flood of immigrants not to assimilate, as did previous generations, but to forge a more revolutionary course.
It's a time of war, and it's time to revolt, and it's your time to show we are a people of a struggle hasta San Diego.
A group of Aztlan revolutionaries at the University of Texas El Paso declares, "We do not seek assimilation, we seek self-preservation of our culture and language." An Aztlan group in San Diego declares that 5 U.S. southwestern states are no longer part of the U.S. Lower the American flag and raise the Aztlan flag in its place. An Aztlan revolutionary at a rally in the foyer of the Los Angeles City Hall proclaims, "When the people in this building don't listen to the demands of our community, it's time to burn it down."
The Aztlan radicals even direct their violent threats at members of the ethnic group they supposedly champion. Immigrants who assimilate and become responsible, productive U.S. citizens are told,
"You sold your soul to the devil, and in hell you shall burn. You too are our enemy, and you too must watch your back. We're coming after all of you."
We have now a huge number of activist organizations here in the United States who exist principally to stir up and agitate these new immigrant populations into anti-American activities, not to assimilate, but to create cadres within the American population that will constantly be agitating for more and more government programs, for more and more civic turmoil.
Radical groups targeting the Latino population in this country have gained enormous influence. Groups such as the National Council of La Raza, the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and the League of United Latin American Citizens. Where these groups have drawn their support reveals much about the politics that have sabotaged efforts to regain control of our borders.
Well, as one of the presidents of La Raza said a few years back, he said, we wouldn't have a Latino or Mexican American movement in this country without the Ford Foundation.
The movement's radical leaders openly admit that much of their funding comes from grants issued by large philanthropic institutions such as the Ford, Rockefeller, and Carnegie Foundations. But why would powerful establishment organizations support revolutionary discord and underwrite the violation of America's borders? Might they have been poorly informed or misled about the organizations they were funding?
It was brought to the Ford Foundation's attention. Sometimes their trustees or presidents would say, oh, gee, we didn't know about that. We didn't realize this. But then when you see that they have people on the board of directors of the Ford Foundations who are actually participants, activists in these organizations, and that they are then continuing year after year, decade after decade to fund these organizations, then you have to be willfully blind to continue to attribute this to ignorance on their part.
Powerful foundations are not the only elements of the establishment supporting revolution. According to Representative Tancredo,
there are people in the Bush administration and in Mexico and in Congress who believe that we should do away with borders entirely. Their ultimate goal is to create this hemispheric free trade area, consolidating all of North and South America into some kind of United States of the Americas.
FTAA sponsors privately admit that they intend for the FTAA to follow in the footsteps of the European Union. In other words, national borders would become very much like our state borders. Thus, there will no longer be an immigration problem because there will be no more immigration, only migration of populations at will. Despite its revolutionary consequences, the FTAA has had unwavering support from several administrations. In 1992, President George H. Bush signed NAFTA, the so-called North American Free Trade Agreement, the predecessor of the FTAA. And with the timely help of fellow internationalists in the Republican leadership, President Clinton pressured Congress to approve NAFTA. Then, in 1994, Clinton hosted the Summit of the Americas in Miami, and the drive to expand NAFTA into the FTAA was launched publicly. Proponents described the FTAA as a broadening and deepening of NAFTA. The FTAA would broaden NAFTA, which applies only to the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, by including every country in the Western Hemisphere with the current exception of Cuba. The FTAA would deepen NAFTA by claiming jurisdiction over an ever-increasing number of functions that have previously been under the control of national, state, and local governments. At the 2001 Quebec Summit of the Americas, President George W. Bush committed his administration to completing negotiations for a fully operational FTAA. From the beginning, proponents created the impression that government developed the FTAA proposal in response to a need and the demands of the people. However, the inspiration for the FTAA did not originate with elected officials. A special televised meeting of the New York-based Council on Foreign Relations provides a window to the real story. The speaker, Vice President Dick Cheney, takes a question from David Rockefeller.
Vice President, I just enjoyed so much your whole speech, but I was particularly pleased that you gave such a strong endorsement for the free trade agreement for all the Americas, subject that has been of great concern to me for many years, and particularly recently, and I think it's absolutely essential for the strength of our economy.
Rockefeller's role in the drive for an FTAA was a lot more central than he portrays. Rockefeller cultivated Latin American leaders who could be counted on to support such a proposal. Both the 1994 Miami Summit and the FTAA proposal were conceived and nurtured by a Rockefeller-created network. Prominent among the organizations sponsoring the Miami event were the Council of the Americas, founder and honorary chairman David Rockefeller, the Americas Society, chairman David Rockefeller, the Forum of the Americas, founder David Rockefeller. The Institute for International Economics, financial backer and board member David Rockefeller. The Trilateral Commission, founder and honorary chairman David Rockefeller. Rockefeller's influence also extends to the current administration. He was chairman emeritus of the CFR when Vice President Dick Cheney once served as a director, a relationship that Cheney concealed during his congressional career.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
From time to time, FTAA proponents get carried away in their enthusiasm and hint at the full revolutionary journey they have planned for America. One such admission came from Henry Kissinger, a member of the Executive Committee of the Trilateral Commission and a heavyweight in the CFR. In a 1993 syndicated column, Kissinger predicted that NAFTA will represent the most creative step toward a new world order taken by any group of countries since the end of the Cold War. NAFTA is not a conventional trade agreement, he admitted, but the architecture of a new international system.
What that means and the implications of this are astounding. I mean, this is a very subversive idea. It says that all of our nation states, all of the national sovereignties will be wiped away. All of our systems will be merged together.
At the time of the first FTAA summit in 1994, President Clinton's Chief of Staff, Thomas F. McClarty, explained,
"This summit is much broader than lowering tariffs, and that's how it should be looked at. This is not a trade summit, it's an overall summit. It will focus on economic integration and convergence."
When globalists seek to rally support for their schemes, they often use code terms such as convergence, integration, harmonization.
Very nice sounding terms. We are going to integrate. Well, what does that mean? They say we're going to integrate our countries. Well, they mean the same thing that we've seen happen in the European Union, where the economic and political systems are integrated. Our legal systems are integrated. Well, then you can't really have a Constitution of the United States, which is separate for. It's distinct from the Constitution of Mexico. We have completely different governing systems. When you integrate those together, you naturally have to disintegrate what is essential to our system.
Another concern is what this loss of sovereignty would ultimately mean for Americans.
There is a plan which is at work here, and they have laid it out in their agendas. They recognize that in order to create this world merger, they have to level the United States down. They have to take many of our businesses and productive capabilities and send them out to other countries, to the four corners of the earth, and eventually the United States will be at a level where it can be integrated into a global socialist regime.
Early Americans were blessed with a culture of self-reliance. They created government to protect their rights and opportunities to thrive, not to stifle initiative by confiscating the fruits of their labor. The internationalists have rejected these lessons of history and seek to regulate the world. If our government continues to follow this agenda, the American middle class faces extinction.
The opportunity for Americans to stop the FTAA is to convince the U.S. Congress to reject any agreement that would establish an FTAA. Only organized action can build sufficient informed pressure on Congress in the time remaining. The John Birch Society offers such a program, and its success depends on your participation.